Hello there, and welcome to this week's episode of Network Roundtable. We are so excited to have with us some super people, one of whom you know, one of whom you might not know from HOAs. You probably know her, but you may not know her from HOAs. So we're lucky that she decided to come on with us today. We're going to be talking about stepping back, which for a lot of people may seem nonsensical in your business, but I hope that we're going to show you ways to do that without destroying everything you've built, but at a point in the year where it's kind of important to take a step back. So anyway, I'm excited to be here. I am thrilled to have Dennis, my partner, and Gina Fiedel. Why don't you tell us who you brought with you today?
I brought Alex Riecke-Gonzales, Alexandra, and the reason that I chose her is because she always has really thoughtful questions in mind in every conversation that that I get to witness her in and participate with her in. And I also think it's really interesting how well we connect when we talk to each other. We have really different lives. We do really different things. I'm a business owner. I'm a web development company owner. Alex is a communications expert, master's student and instructor at Kent State University. And so our activities couldn't be further apart in so many ways, and yet we come together just in really interesting ways in our conversation. So I thought that would bring a lot of value today. And also I just think she's brilliant and beautiful and wonderful and smart.
Yeah, well, and we love Alex.
Go ahead, Stephanie. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say we love Alex too, so all of that goes extra for Dennis and myself. So Alex, why don't you tell us a little bit about why you wanted to be with Gina and with us today to talk about stepping back?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, any chance I get to talk to Gina is just one that I am more than happy to take because, like she said, we both lead very different lives, but we both lead very busy lives. So a lot of times we seem to just pass each other in comments rather than actually getting to sit down and have a conversation. And boy, can we have conversations. So I was so happy when she asked me to do this. I was more than happy to cancel the meeting that I had to do. Not gonna lie, I didn't want to go to it. But Gina is just, she's so fantastic. She is such a thinker and such a giver. She is more than willing to hop into any comment stream, leave these beautiful, thoughtful comments, and she always responds to other people. So it's just really, that's what initially drew me to her, and then I found out that in a previous life she was an artist, and we just had an entire conversation about that industry because I think it's fascinating that she went from being an artist to web development. You don't see that very often. So it's just, any chance I get to talk to Gina, I know I'm going to end up learning something. So that's really why I was really excited to be here.
Thank you, Alex.
I'm sorry. Did you guys hear that?
I heard a piano.
I think it was Dennis inviting himself to a hangout.
No,
yeah, it sounded like an invite.
It was my friend calling me, a friend who knows that I'm on the air right now. And when I turned off notifications and muted it and ignored it and everything else, it just kept ringing. Please forgive. Sorry, Alex.
Oh, it's cool. If it happens to anybody, it should happen to me. I mean, I'm more than understanding that. Can I say shit on this show?
You just did. So.
I know. I thought about it, but I was like, I'm gonna go with it. Shit happens. It's cool.
And what if they said no?
If they said no, then I would have been like, I redact that last statement. Stuff happens.
But
Please.
First you would have said damn.
Probably.
All right. Stephanie, where are we going next?
Oh, okay. I thought you might want to say something, but that's cool. I was gonna say thank you to Alex and to Gina for being here, and just give you a little bit of the reason that I'm happy to have them here, even though I already gushed a little at the beginning. Both of these ladies are very thoughtful, very perceptive, and I love the insights that they bring from these very different perspectives that they have, because as Gina mentioned, they're in very different industries, if you will. But that's what I thought would be super interesting about having them here today, is because as a business owner, I think, Gina, you have a ton of experience with that, and the ways in which you have to face some challenges while you're a business owner. But Alex has a totally different perspective, while at the same time using what she knows, communication, to try to help solve some of these problems. So thank you both for being here today, and I'm really excited to talk about stepping back because I suck at it. I'm really, really bad at it. I am the kind of person who, when there's a problem, I'm like, okay, so we need to work harder, and we need to concentrate more, and we need to focus, and we need to do more solutions and more activity. And I really am coming to find, although I suck at it, that if you can take that step back and give yourself some space, sometimes you get a much better solution with a lot less effort and a lot less headache and heartache. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to kind of touch on all those points during the discussion today, and maybe give our business owners some tips, things that are really concrete ways that you can take a step back without just slamming the door and saying, I don't want to be here anymore.
It's a really good point that you made about sucking at it, because I think whenever we have a conversation like this, we're really talking to ourselves. We're really teaching ourselves and questioning and answering for what we need, because it's such a complex sort of issue. And just really appreciate that you said that.
Well, thank you. And that brings up an interesting point, which is sometimes we don't know. I think as owners, sometimes we don't realize that we're in that struggle that's not getting us anywhere. We don't realize we need to take a step back. So I don't know, maybe Gina, do you have some experience or some indicators that you get that help you realize, okay, now I'm not doing anything very productive here. I'm just, ruminating, or I'm just continuing to try the same thing all the time. Now I know it's time to take a step back.
It's a good question. Most of the kinds of stepping back that I tend to encounter are relational. They have to do with how I'm communicating with people, the responses that I'm coming up with, the kind of bombardment that I get. So for me, I can tell, well, if I'm revved up, if I'm just in a kind of speedy, get things done, multitasking like crazy, jumping from this thing to the next thing to the next thing, that's an indication, because my body's going to tell me that I'm just moving too fast. But when it's a relational kind of a thing, then I notice a retraction. I notice a constriction in my chest. I notice that I'm nervous. I notice that I get angry. I notice all of my kind of reactionary responses. So I've learned that I need to step back so that I'm not just being reactive. I'm not impulsively coming back at something. And I think that can be extended beyond the relational. It can be extended to tasks that we have. When you start the day and you see that list of everything that has to happen, and you kind of feel your heart sink and you get that nervous, kind of churned up feeling, then it's time to kind of look at that list, prioritize, take one, cover the list. It's almost like if you could black it out and just see one item, because I think that when we approach one thing at a time, that's a kind of stepping back also, so that we can calm ourselves down and kind of face one thing at a time.
Yeah, I really like that, because to me that gives me the image of stepping back from a cliff, right? Or maybe from a mountain face, it's like if all you can do is see, oh my gosh, I've got so far to go, sometimes you can't see the step that's right in front of you. So that's a really good point. I like that.
Yeah, it's paralyzing. And then you tend to get nothing done, or you do 10 things kind of part way instead of one thing well. So sometimes, for instance, when I'm writing a blog post, I have to step back from all my other tasks. so that they're not infiltrating my thinking. Or if I'm working on some on-site optimization for a website, I have to shut down my email so that I don't get distracted and pulled into other situations, so that I can kind of keep my mind on one track. And as small business owners or micro business owners, we just have so much on our plates. It's just insane. So it's just an important thing to learn. But we can all improve a lot, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I've actually, Stephanie, you asked about looking for signs that indicate that you need to step back. I've been really personally working on not waiting for the signs, not being reactional. Is that a word? Reactional to
Reactionary.
Thank you. Not being reactive to those signs, but actually not necessarily scheduling time in my day, but making sure that in every single day I take 5 minutes to sit back and ask myself how I'm feeling. How am I doing? Do I need to take more time to step back? Am I okay moving forward? I don't have it down to a science. I don't have it perfect, but I think being proactive about stepping back can really reduce the situations in which you get to the point where if you don't step back, you literally can't move forward. So I think rather than making it reactive, making it proactive could be a really great step for some small business owners.
Yeah, learning how to check in with yourself is just a fantastic skill. And you're almost describing a little mini meditation where you can just sit and breathe for 5 minutes and just try to calm your nervous system down and just sort of see what's going on in there. That's fabulous.
Yeah, and what I like about it, Gina, is this notion that it's a practice.
Yeah.
Right, because I think that's the hardest part, especially as you said for business owners, when we've got so many things going on and all these people saying I need this, I want this, and all these different things vying for our attention. We do have to have a practice of coming to a place where, okay, right now this is 5 minutes for me, or 10 or 15 or however much.
Whatever it is.
What's the thing? If you have time to meditate, you should do 20 minutes. If you don't have time, you should do an hour.
I love that. That's a really good one. And I tend to look at almost everything I do as a practice. And that may have evolved out of my yoga practice and learning about what practicing really is and not having an end goal. So whenever we think of things as a practice, I find it's very empowering, because we can be so hard on ourselves and expect so much. And I tend to be a perfectionist, so I can beat myself up with the best of them. And if I can regard something as a practice, something that I'm trying to just practice on a day-to-day basis or over a long period of time without necessarily any pressure to arrive somewhere. There's not an end goal when you're practicing. You're just practicing. So it takes a lot of pressure off then. And so, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it looks like someone's got a question for us.
Well,
is it a question, Dennis?
Well, I don't know if it's a question. And Omisido, I don't know if I pronounced your name right. This is my first time meeting you. Thank you for your comment. It's about stepping back, or more like cleaning up your messes before you move on. And that's really what you were saying, Alex. What was interesting is I actually pinned it up on the screen at the same time as you started to talk about it. But yeah, it's just being aware, self-aware, early and often, And if you can do that, then you can start to keep a more steady course, a less stressful course, a more aware course.
Yeah, and being alive is kind of habit forming, and we create habits by everything that we do, and we create reaction habits too. we create habits about how we deal with stress or how we deal with being really busy or people coming at us, people making demands. And I wrote that article last week about getting into your branding groove. Well, we create grooves with everything that we do. And if we can kind of move away from the groove that we're typically in and take a look at, well, how do I typically react? How do I usually cope? And step back from that and take a look at it, then we can learn something about how to clean up our messes, as Omi said. Because if we just pressure ourselves to clean everything up, it's another form of creating extra work. It's another form of creating more pressure. So I guess it depends on your word usage there. You know, what is a mess? What is it that you're cleaning up? And I love the way Alex talked about that in a proactive sense. And I'm going to guess that Omi means the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess one of the other things that I've found particularly helpful is the ability not only to recognize it, but sometimes to verbalize it, right? To just be able to name what's happening. Oh, okay, so that's stress. And then you ask yourself the question, like you get that, you know, like you were talking about, Gina, you get that tight feeling in your stomach or up here, or sometimes it's my shoulders. They get up here in my ears, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's stress. And then just sometimes by naming it stress, instead of getting all those thoughts that follow your stress, like it means I'm not doing enough, it means that I'm messing up, it means that someone's not happy with me, or whatever other thoughts follow the stress feeling, you've named it and you've kind of taken the sting out of it. I don't know, have you guys had that experience, or have you found another way to kind of create a mental trick that lets you get past it?
Well, I think you brought up a really good point about meta emotions. When, you know, we have a feeling, we have a sensation in our body, we have an emotion, and there's a certain amount of discomfort in many kinds of emotions, right? So what we do as human beings is we add to that suffering by thinking about it, we kind of exaggerate it by calling it things, by saying what that means, by making assumptions of where that's going to lead us. Oh, I'm stressful, that means I'm going to screw up. You know, if we can just go into the root feelings, like you said, and name them and just sit with what those feelings are in our body, then we can try to sort of bypass that extra piling on, because it's really the piling on that gets us in trouble. It's not the actual feelings. And that's something where stepping back and sitting quietly for a few minutes, breathing, going outside, giving your body some other sensations, that can help too. But for me, the thing that moves me through the fastest is to be with it. Is to actually allow myself to experience what's happening, you know, doing what I'm doing while I'm doing it, and not doing all that extra baggage, all the accoutrements to the feelings.
You know, Stephanie, this is, well, as you know, I've been working on exactly this stuff a lot lately. And Stephanie and I, in the last 2 weeks, have had a number of conversations about different things that I'm learning in my own life. But when you brought up stress, one of the things that I recently learned that has helped me is to take and understand stress is, for me at least, a larger item, and I need to be more attuned to those meta emotions, as you called them. And I've realized that stress encompasses for me both depression and anxiety. And those are very different things. Anxiety being I'm stressing out about something in the future, and depression is I'm stressing out about something in the past. And so I try and figure out which direction that stress is going, which I can usually figure out first from my emotions before even my thoughts, because my thoughts are so muddled. Once I've got that figured out, I use a little thing called the five senses. Have you guys ever heard of this? I know you have, Stephanie. I've told you about it. But Gina, Alex, have you heard about using the five senses to kind of center yourself? Because I think this is worth telling small business owners.
I haven't heard of it with that name, but I think it's very similar to what I do. But I'd love to have you describe that. I'm really interested.
Okay, so what I do is I just pay attention to what my five senses are. Without saying good, bad, it's just I notice the clouds in the sky outside. I feel my leg crossed over my other leg. I hear the fan on my computer. I taste the Jolly Rancher I was eating before I got on the show, and, well, I smell that I need another shower today. So, benefits to an HOA. We don't have smellorama yet. Anyway, sorry, I have to derail everything. It's what I do for a living. But I don't know if you noticed, I do it with my fingers. So the first one, and they aren't in order of feeling, but the first one, second one, third one, fourth one, fifth one. And then I tend to look at my hand and go, am I ready to go? And it's like, yes, or, no, this is just a reminder. And then I'll go through the five senses again until I can look at this and it feels right. At that moment, I know I'm centered enough to finally start to work on. So I don't now walk away, oh good, now I feel okay, I don't have to. No, that's now the moment to start working on whatever it was I was feeling. If I work on it while I'm still feeling anxiety or feeling depression, I just pile it on. I just end up stuffing it into a backpack and adding it to the other ones that I've had that day.
That's beautiful.
There's my little trick. It works really well. I only learned it like 3 weeks ago, and I'm probably doing it 5 times a day. I just love it.
It's really beautiful.
And Stephanie, am I a different person?
Well, you're still you, Dennis. But I think yes, you've become. I've noticed a reduction in your reactivity to stress. For sure.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm working on. Right. Well said. My reactivity to stress, which Alex can also attest to.
Yes, I've seen it. I've seen it in action. This discussion is interesting because in a health class, I'm taking a women's health class for the purposes of my thesis, and we talked about emotions a week ago, and the tricky thing about emotions is you really have to understand your own emotions to be able to name them. I think you're right, Stephanie, that once we can name them and identify them, then we can do what Gina's saying and actually feel them, be okay with feeling them, and that's how we move on. But actually sitting and naming your emotions, she gave us, it was like a packet. It was like 3 sheets of straight emotion words, and I could not choose one. I was like, I do not know how I feel right now. I do not, and I mean that's all a part of the process of stepping back and asking yourself how you feel, and can you even identify it, because it takes such this might make very, very masculine people uncomfortable, but you really have to be able to identify with that emotional response in order to do the stepping back and the processes that you guys have mentioned.
Well, you can always just start with the body sensation. You can start with, I feel something in my chest. It's hot, or it's orange. It's kind of tight and strong, and it feels like it's rising up. And then just be in with that feeling. And I'm saying I actually have a hard time doing that, and I have a hard time kind of labeling the parts. But even before you identify it as a particular emotion, you can go to the body sensations and just stay there. You may only get tight, and that's all there is in terms of language. But you're being in your body, so you're allowing it to metabolize then, rather than pushing away from it so that you're not with it. I kind of learned some of this in my yoga practice, because so much of yoga is physically incredibly uncomfortable. And in order to kind of move forward in your practice, it's really important to be able to stay. And in order to be able to stay, you have to learn how to tolerate those sensations. So starting with the physical sensations is always something I try to do, and I'm not great at it, but I've been practicing for a long time.
Well, and I think, Gina, one of the reasons that it's hard, whether we try to put a name for an emotion on it or whether we just try to describe the physical sensation, is because of fear. Because what happens for most of us, I can speak for me here, I can't speak for everybody, but for me, oftentimes what happens is you have the feeling like, oh, I felt a flutter in my chest, or, oh, I can't breathe. And instead of just being with, oh, I can't breathe, you jump to, so there must be something wrong, so maybe I'm having a heart attack, so maybe I'm going to die. Right? You know, that, and you don't, it's not like it's a mental process that actually you control, at least you don't think you do, it just jumps there automatically. And so what happens by focusing just on the sensation is you try to stop that story. Right? Because it's when, like you said, when you get to the story, which is, and this means something bad, that you get stuck in the cycle, or you even make things worse. And so I think that's part of what's really hard about the naming it, at least for me, is you name it and immediately 100 implications of stress. Stress is bad. It gives me high blood pressure. It's going to make me have a heart attack. That's what comes to your mind. And so some of it is just saying stress is just stress.
Right.
It's not good or bad, like what Dennis was saying. Let's not put a judgment on it. Let's just determine what I'm feeling first and sit with it and see how that goes. But it's so hard.
It is. And sometimes when we're lucky, naming it can give us a huge piece of relief. Just a couple days ago, I was just spinning. A lot was going on. There just was a lot going on, and I was spinning. And when I finally just kind of broke down a little bit and allowed it to flood my system, I felt so relieved, because I was able to identify, oh, I'm really upset right now. I'm really uncomfortable. And so I allowed myself to feel that, and then I felt so much better because I let myself be with it. So we can either create fear with the story, or we can just kind of sometimes just kind of go with it and then get relieved. Oh, I'm behaving this way because I'm angry. Oh, I'm behaving like this, or I feel that because I'm feeling insecure, or I don't really understand what that person said to me, and it agitated me. You know, we need to give ourselves permission for our feelings. We're raised to not have them, basically, or at least people in my generation certainly were, and in my family I was, and it's really interesting how we spend so much energy trying to move away from our feelings instead of cozying up to them. And cozying up to them gives us a much more passionate life. You know, I don't want to be monochromatic in this like single, very narrow channel of a range of emotions and never move this way or this way. I'd rather feel something really, really strongly, even if it's terribly uncomfortable, so that when I feel the other side of it, it's that much brighter.
That's
Okay, before we go on, I actually, is it here yet? Is it here? Yes, here it is. Okay. I want to put this up because Nicole got this question in before you were done with your comment, and it is directly pertaining to what you were talking about, Gina. Why would we need to name something? Why can't we just allow ourselves to feel? Just feeling things exactly like Gina is talking about now, just now.
We would love to be able to. I think that's where I place huge value on that, Nicole. That's where what I'm trying to get to all the time.
Well, and you know, this always, like, I love Brené Brown. If I could meet anybody, it would be her. She's so fantastic. But I have seen her TED Talk on vulnerability like 20 times because, oh my gosh, it's just incredible. And that's what this conversation is reminding me of, because she talks about how, you know, we really suppress all of these emotions because of vulnerability, because we don't want to allow ourselves to be vulnerable to the things around us. But as Gina mentions, if we don't allow ourselves to do that, then we don't get to feel the good feelings. She says, you can't have love and true joy and happiness without having anger and hate and really, depression. You have to be willing to feel both. And to do that, you have to allow yourself to be vulnerable. So, Stephanie, when you talk about this fear, I think that's a part of it. A part of it is if we actually sit and acknowledge our emotions and acknowledge that we are angry or we are sad, then we are acknowledging that there's a part of us that is very vulnerable. And if we're, we don't even want to admit it to ourselves, right? Because then we're admitting to ourselves that we're vulnerable. So I think that has something to do with why we can't just sit and feel. And I mean, my generation too, growing up, it was like, I don't have time for that. Which is an excuse, but it's like I don't, we sit there and I'm like, well, if I really sit here and feel my anger and work through that, that could take me like a half hour, and I need that half hour to do. I don't, in the moment, I don't think about what it's doing to my health. I'm just like, I have this paper that I have to write, and it is due tomorrow, and I need that half hour, so I'm just going to push those emotions aside, which, of course, I'm still working through, but it's. I think that's a part of it too. We're so focused on what we're supposed to be doing that we're like, oh, I can't deal with that right now. I can't deal with that story. I'm stuck in this story.
Yeah, and actually this is going to sound like a contradiction, but I find that moving into a task that I need to do or distracting myself with some other kind of energy can actually contribute to my feeling better. And that's a form of stepping back, really. If I'm upset about this email that I just received from a client who's somehow not understanding something I've explained 15 times, and there's an energy buildup there that's not comfortable, and I just want it to feel smooth, if I focus on some bookkeeping or come on to Google Plus and get involved in some posts or whatever, I may come back later to that email and have a completely different reaction to it. If I may have opened up my system to be able to be more compassionate or empathic to where that person is at if I've taken a little break from it by distracting. So I guess what I'm saying is there are different benefits and drawbacks, and the way you were describing it, Alex, I think could be bad for our health. If we stuff our emotions, that's one thing. If we can delay them or decide to put them aside for a little while we do something else while still acknowledging them, that's really productive.
Well, and I have a question for both of you and for Dennis too. How much of this stuffing down or this ignoring of our emotions comes from the fact that we're particularly talking about business? Because we could apply all this, and Brene talks a lot. I love Brene, by the way, so thanks for bringing her up, Alex. She talks a lot about in your personal lives, right? Like in your personal relationships and how it can impact you. Although her latest book, Daring Greatly, is also for entrepreneurs, so I highly recommend it. If you haven't read any of her stuff, it's a great place to get to know her. But I think there's an added layer of it needs to be cold and emotionless because we're talking about business, right? And I think sometimes that doesn't serve us as a business owner, particularly as Gina talks about as a micro business owner, as a very small business owner, because you are the heart of your business. And if you can't be clear about what's right for you and what's not right for you, then it can't ever be right for your business. You know what I mean? It's kind of like trying to sell something that you don't believe in. You're never going to be very successful at it because you don't believe in it.
So what was the question?
It was a good one. It was so good, you're speechless. No, the question is, do you think it's particularly difficult because people have their business hats on, right? So it's like it's hard for us as individuals, but then when we put our business hat on, it's even harder because boy, there's not supposed to be any emotion at all there.
I have something to say, but I want to wait for Alex.
You know, I have difficulty with that because I study communication. There is no such thing as emotionless communication. It's not human, it's not normal. And if that is what we expect in business today, then I am highly concerned. That it makes me excited that we're moving into this idea of relationships in business that we see all over Google Plus, and I think it's a growing trend. I hope it's a growing trend. But if you're going to build relationships with people, if you're going to build relationships, either it's with customers, with clients, if you're going to build relationships with other businesses are made up of people. So I think this notion of being emotionless in business is not real. I don't see how that could be a real expectation. I don't see how that's truly possible. Maybe we feel like we're being emotionless, and maybe there's a way to come off. Obviously don't go in there and like no one's going to expect you to come into a meeting and be like, I'm so angry today, and just go off about how you got stuck in traffic and you had there's a certain expectation of not bringing up those heightened emotions that don't have anything to do with the meeting, but the meeting itself should never be emotionless. I don't see how it's possible if you're talking about people interacting, even if it is just about business. What do you think, Gina?
I'm totally on board with you on that. And when we started our business 16 years ago, we had this feeling of being kind of outliers in a way. We were working from our home. We were coming to this world from an art background. We were in a fairly new town. We lived in Boston and New York, and here we were in Santa Barbara. We hadn't done business here before. We didn't really know the culture as well. And we made a very, very conscious choice to just be ourselves. To be ourselves as much as we possibly could, to always be authentic. We wore suits a couple times, but we really we never tried to pretend we were something that we weren't. And that included being the people that we are. And what we found is that that's actually what's made our business successful here. And people have a fondness for who we are as human beings, and that's because we approach it as human beings, and that includes emotion, and that includes a lot of heart. And I don't think it's possible to separate my business persona from my personal persona. Now, of course, we need to behave appropriately. In business, we need to probably be less reactive than we are in our personal lives. I think it's really critical to do that. But I never feel that we need to pretend that we're colder than we really are. And, well, especially in my job, I think that it actually serves my clients really well for me to come from a really personal place, because I'm helping them to establish their online identity. And we can't kind of get into that deep stuff without it being a person-to-person, kind of thing. But I am striving, and always have been, to make as little division between business and personal as possible. And the given on that is, within appropriate boundaries, obviously. But yeah.
So could we say that being professional doesn't mean you're not a human being?
Correct.
That'd be another way to say it, because yes, there are certain expectations about the way that you behave. For example, you show up when you say you're going to show up. If you say you're going to charge a certain price, you respect what you said. But that doesn't at all mean that you have no personality or no humanity.
Right. And I mean, the beautiful thing about expectations is that they are man-made. we make those expectations. This is something that I talk to my students about when we talk about nonverbals. We talk about time. If I show up on time for our classes, that is giving them the nonverbal that I expect them to show up on time. If I showed up late as someone in a position of authority, if I show up late, that is setting the norm that it's okay for them to show up late. So that's why I show up on time. And, I like teaching sometimes. I'm okay with showing up for that. But a lot of the norms that we have, a lot of the expectations we have, they're created by us. And I think it's good for us to acknowledge that. I mean, the on-time thing, I don't think that one's gonna go away. Though in Hawaii, Hawaiian time is true. So in Hawaii, it's a little different. In Hawaii, it's okay to show up late. But again, it's a norm that has been created in that specific context. So if you're the kind of person that doesn't fit traditional norms and you're a small business owner, I think it's okay, because we can always adapt, we can always recreate these things considered expectations and norms. And if you're feeling that way, then I think that you'll find an audience that also feels that way.
But don't you think that you need to be first conscious of that? So you have to know what is important to you. You have to know what your values are, and then you need to communicate that to people. Because the problem is, I think where people run into trouble is they don't say the clock isn't important to me. And you'll find a better way to say it. Clearly, that's not what you're going to say to your clients. But you need to make clear to clients that this is how I work. And so if you want to work with me, these are the values that are important, not showing up on time or wearing a suit. And if you're looking for somebody who absolutely shows up on time but doesn't give you their creative best, then I'm not the right person for you. Because
Absolutely.
I think that's where a lot of people fall down, is they're out there and they're trying to find a way to communicate with their clients, and they're just so desperate to get any clients at all that they're doing things that aren't necessarily consistent with who they are, and it gets you in trouble every time.
Yeah, because you can't keep it up.
No.
Our projects can last for months. And then we have clients we've had for 15 years, so there can be a long time span. If you're pretending, if you're not really being who you are, it's going to fall apart. And there's going to be a crisis of identity and a crisis of relationship. So that's really critical. And I think that being in business for ourselves, it's a huge teacher all in itself, because we learn so much about who we are in the way that we relate to the people that we work for. And we're in a service industry, so there's a little bit of that pressure of the customer's always right, and how do you kind of shape and form around the parameters that are necessary and that you can foresee moving forward are going to be really important, even if your client doesn't understand because they're new in the space. All that stuff is going to rely on us knowing who we are and coming from that place with integrity, or it's just going to crumble. And yeah.
Well, and I think maybe, and this is where I want to kind of close the loop, if you will, sometimes a crisis is what actually helps us recognize that.
Right.
Right? And sometimes we're just going and going and going, and it's only when we kind of hit the wall, metaphorically speaking, not literally, I hope, that we can actually take that step back and try to put into place some of the things we've talked about to understand, okay, where did I lose sight of me, or where did I lose sight of, the fact that the client and I were not on the same page, or my vendor and I, or my employee and I, or whatever it is. So let's, we don't have a ton of time left, but let's think about this, a situation that all of us have had, which you mentioned earlier, Gina. You get an email from a client or a vendor or an employee, and they're ticked off. That's an emotionally charged situation, right? And so, Gina, you mentioned that one of the things you do to step back is you focus on other things. You kind of distract yourself with something else. But could we brainstorm of other things that entrepreneurs, that business owners could do in that situation so that they can actually learn from it instead of just flying off the handle and shooting off an email full of 4-letter words like, I never want to talk to you again?
Yeah, when I talk about kind of switching my focus and distracting myself, it's really just to take a break. It's not really necessarily turning away from the situation. It's more broadening the situation so that it fits in a context of everything else that's going on in the day or the week or the month, so that it doesn't loom so large. If somebody is upset with me or having a question or they've got a conflict or something isn't feeling quite right to them and they try to communicate it, number one, email is a completely imperfect form of communication. We don't know what the tone of voice is. People often don't write carefully. They don't choose their words smartly. And the other side of that is that we don't read carefully either. And sometimes when I first read an email like that, I might take it in quite differently than I'll read it an hour later or even 15 minutes later. It's like, oh, wait a minute, that actually doesn't sound so bad. So when I'm being reactive because of whatever else is going on in my day or because I'm stressed out or because I'm pressed for time, I might not even read the message properly. So taking kind of a step back and broadening your experience will give you an opportunity to come back to it with a new eye, with a new heart, with a new sort of fresh set of just a fresh canvas or a fresh board, and try again. And then putting yourself in trying to use some of your empathy skills. Put yourself in their shoes. What's it like for them? They're out in our business in particular. It's a really heightened emotional kind of setup. People are. There are a lot of frustrations. There are a lot of expectations. There are a lot of pressing demands. The project is usually an extracurricular kind of thing where somebody is also dealing with their boss or their other set of tasks that have to happen. I mean, there's just so many factors. So the more that we can kind of understand where they might be coming from. And then one of the best tools that I have is to say, can you please explain that a little bit more? Could you be a little bit more specific? I'm not quite sure that I understand what you're trying to say. And you might not even get that clear. But asking a question. Because usually when we ask a question, we'll feel differently afterwards, after we hear the answer. It's almost foolproof in any kind of conflict with our partners, spouses, children, best friend, clients, boss, vendor. Asking, what was that? What is that? In whatever way is appropriate. And then when you hear the answer, often it's like, oh, I can deal with that. Yeah, that's not as bad as I thought it was. So, asking questions.
Yeah, that was going to be my recommendation. And trust me, you would be shocked the emails I get from some of my students, even as an instructor, as someone I like to say that I'm not really in a position of authority, but I am. And some of their emails are just, I'm like, oh, you're a freshman. It's okay. We have 4 years to fix this. We have 4 years to fix this. But really, I always, the first question I ask when I get an email that comes off really inconsiderate, I'm like, why? What is going on in their life right now that is so difficult that maybe they didn't have the time to really think about this email. Maybe they didn't have the energy to think about it. Maybe something terrible happened in their lives that I'm not aware of. And I love that Gina brought up how email is a very, very difficult way to communicate. It is completely imperfect. But when we talk about stepping back, email is it gives you a great opportunity to do that. So in that way, email communication is really helpful if you are the kind of person that, doesn't generally step back. Email is great because it gives you that opportunity. You can write out all your feelings and then erase it all and not send. It gives you that extra added time to step back and think about it. When stepping back gets really difficult is when it's a face-to-face issue. That is when you have to have a lot of self-awareness and and I like Gina's, if you're just so mad and you're really getting into it, just remembering that question, why? Or I don't understand. Just remembering that, even in the heat of the moment, can help you so much in face-to-face communication, because that's where it gets real, and that's where stepping back can be a really big problem, because sometimes even if your response to the person is, you know what, I have to step back from this for a while, that can make them angrier because they think that it can, because they think that that you're not willing to address it and that you're not you're not. So sometimes even that's an issue in face-to-face communication. So once you tackle stepping back in the online space, I challenge you to tackle it in face-to-face communication, because that's where it can get really, really tricky.
So true.
Yep.
It's hard.
But I think the one thing I would add, and what you ladies said is, I agree with everything. The one thing I would add is that we have to keep in mind that it's a practice, right? And I think that's where we get into trouble is, for example, if we're face-to-face with a client and we're trying to ask them for the sale and they say no, we really need to recognize that it's not the end of the world. I am practicing here. And so don't think about the fact that you have to sell this client. Think about what's a way that I could get more information so that I can help them make a good decision for them. Hopefully meaning they buy my product or my service. But what are the things I can do so that this interaction helps me understand their position more, as opposed to what can I do to make them sign on the bottom line?
Oh my gosh. I love this comment from Cheryl because I do the same thing. Okay, so Cheryl says, everyone has a story and many will explain a response you got, whether in person or in writing. I've found with even really difficult people, I make up the story, make it really bad, and it helps me take what they say or do less personally, even if they are really just mean. I do that. I make up stories about people's lives. And it's always, A, it's way more interesting than what's actually happening in their life, so it's more fun for me. And B, it does make me way more understanding, maybe sometimes too understanding. But yeah, I just had to bring that up. Okay.
Yeah, I think Cheryl just gave us her secret sauce to being the nice person that she is. That's like, thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try that. That's great. Now I get you more that you're doing that. That's so cool.
In a nutshell.
Very cool. And yeah, Stephanie, I was going to say it's a whole nother conversation, but selling never works, in my opinion. I
don't know. I've done sales for years. Selling never works in personal relationships. Selling works, though. It can really work, but definitely in interpersonal relationships, once you are not actually selling, that can be a real problem. That depends a lot, though, on a key element. Are you selling just yourself, as in a solopreneur or really small entrepreneurial business? If you're in a larger business where it's all getting handed off, so long as you're honest with them about what the company's going to do, they're not going to be interacting with you again. And it can work. Hey, I've made a lot of money with it. What can I say?
Okay, I take it back.
Well, and I think I agree with both of you, but I think the key element, Dennis, is what you said at the very end. if you're not going to be interacting with them again.
Yeah.
Right? And the problem is most of the people we're talking to, I think most of our audience members are not in that situation. And more, even big brands, I think are struggling with the notion that you're a one-off customer. Because really, ultimately, what you want to do is you want to build a relationship with your customer, whether you're big or small, because you don't want them just to buy once. You'd love to have them buy your stuff for life.
Right. I've had prospects come to me and say, I'm hiring you because you didn't sell me. And this other company was selling me left and right, and it felt really artificial, and I don't believe them, and it's really hard to build trust. And the kind of conversation that we had was so much more about delving into my needs and how you can help me, and sharing what you know and how that might push us both forward together. And so it's made me very, very conscious. And I think it's partly because I've only worked for myself, Dennis. I haven't had that formal sales hat to wear ever.
Okay, so now you're breaking sales up the way I broke stress up earlier. See, to me there are two types of sales. Just like I said, there's anxiety and depression. One is truly just manipulation, and the other one is sales techniques designed around the building of relationship. The problem with those techniques is they can't be sustained long term. When you take those techniques and you move them into interpersonal relationships, they need to be changed and adapted. They need to be different, okay? Because you're talking about a longer term period of time over which you're building, developing, and strengthening that relationship. Relationship selling is about basically moving this process along faster for building trust in a relationship. The problem is that it will do this every time, okay? Because it's unsustainable by the human. This is reference back to what you were saying earlier, Gina, about and it's not that relationship selling is faking it, but it's developing these relationships extremely quickly. Right. And it works. It works every time. It's helpful. You are, in fact, looking out for the other person's interests, but it's not humanly sustainable over a long time. Just ask Cheryl. She can tell when I'm really interested in her and when I'm selling her, sometimes faster than I can. And because I've got so many years of sales, I'll de facto sometimes into those techniques. I'm not talking about, the alternate close or any of these absolutely annoying manipulation techniques. Okay? But there's still a difference between the way you build a relationship that is designed to be long-term and one that is around helping somebody get what they need, understanding what they need as quickly as possible, and getting out of their life as quickly as possible because they're busy.
Right.
Well,
it's interesting. I was thinking about this just yesterday, actually. I was thinking about, because there was a lot of that kind of activity yesterday where people were accepting contracts and stuff. And I was thinking about how I am in the pre-relationship, and then when we get the job, how my behavior sustains throughout the length of the relationship. And I was questioning and asking myself, do I really show up in the way that I promise that I will? And do I really show up over time with that same depth of focus that I give in the initial conversations? And I don't think I have a 100% track record on that, and I think that it's something I need to practice and something I need to be aware of more and more. And it was a little bit hard to look at, but it was a great question to ask myself. In the beginning of forming a relationship, it can happen really fast, and there's like this really quick trust building, and then because our relationships can last over a decade, they can really keep going. It is important to always be that person that you've promised that you're going to be. And sometimes that takes some extra awareness and effort that I want to do. I want to think of myself as somebody who can sustain that, but nobody's perfect because I'm just practicing, right?
Yeah, I love that, and I do think that we could do a whole other show about that because
Yeah.
I think that a ton of it, Dennis, has to do with exactly what you're talking about. Depending on what you provide, the way that you approach the relationship and the length of the relationship is very different. So,
Yes.
yeah.
And
So,
I'd love to hear more about all that. That's really fascinating.
well,
Yeah,
we'll have to set it up.
Yeah,
yeah, maybe we could do a couple of shows at some point in time, Stephanie, on sales. I got some interesting theories when it comes to that.
that could be really interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So,
You could
excellent.
interview me, and I'll be the superhero and the sidekick. I am, after all, a DUce, so I can do that.
Oh my gosh. Well, as we usually do, we're running late. We're over time already. But I'd love to get closing thoughts from Alex first, maybe, and then from Gina. No, I forgot. Dennis, do you want to go first or do you want to go last?
Yeah, so my closing thoughts, I've been setting these up for a while because the conversation has been moving so fast that I couldn't do justice to the comments. So I've got 11 comments that I've selected that I really liked, and I'm going to move through them as quickly as I can. Let's see. Omi said, Iron Man plus shower equals rust. I loved that. That's apparently why I didn't take a shower. Great to meet you, Stephanie Sims and Dennis DUce. Found the event and your show through my beloved Sherry Manifest. We are having breakfast while watching, and of course, it is always a real pleasure to connect with, see both Gina Fiedel and Alex. This was an impromptu joining for me. Glad to have you. Your comments today have been fantastic. Grizz, as always, has got great thoughts. I love working with Grizz whenever I get the chance. He said early on, so should I be offended to demonstrate masculinity? A lot of people find music resonate to the feeling, and maybe paying attention to what music you want to listen to would be helpful to identify emotion. That's actually a great tip, I thought, for a lot of people who don't want to get into the emotions. It allows them to stay safely removed and still deal with the stuff. Again, Grizz, I just wanted to point out he was putting up comments that pointed back to your website. So there's a link in there for Fat Eyes and explains who they are. Go check it out. Cheryl came in, hey, Dave Pipe, feel self-conscious that I show up late and the discussion is all about being on time. To which Dave wrote, then you timed it well, Cheryl. Then Sanjeev said again, spot on, Alex and Gina. Emotions are a part of our communication. Completely separated emotions out of business communication has been unfortunate reality in the past, but it's encouraging that balance is being brought back. Nicole had some great comments today. Couldn't do those justice, but this one was good. Wearing masks gets demanding and draining. That came up a number of different times throughout the show, so great there. Cheryl says, I agree, Gina Fiedel, that you have to know who you are in order to come across with pure intent. Sanjeev again, boy, I guess I liked his comments. Indeed, Cheryl, knowing who you are is the most balanced way to engage in any context. And then the last one I was going to share has already been shared, so I'm just going to go ahead and end at that point. So there's my closing thoughts. There are everybody else's closing thoughts.
Okay. So, Alex, any closing thoughts for us? And you let us know where we can find you?
Yeah. Okay. So closing thoughts. This was fun. As I mentioned, any chance I get to talk to Gina, I will always take. And of course, Stephanie and Dennis. I feel like I see you guys constantly, but it's always nice to see you. Thoughts on the topic in particular, stepping back is so important. Grizz, when I mentioned masculinity, I was really pointing at least in Western society, if you're considered a masculine male, generally emotions are not something you're allowed to have unless they are things like anger. So that's why I mentioned it. You are totally welcome to feel masculine if that's how you're feeling today. And where you can find me, it's cool. It's cool. Where you can find me, Google+, as always, SEO wise, we're still working on things. We're actually working on a new show, but we're getting really technical with it, so it's not going to come out for probably another month or so. But yeah, just find me in Plus when I'm there.
Cool. And Gina, any closing thoughts? And
Well,
where can we?
this was a real pleasure. I wasn't expecting for us to dive as deep as we did, and I'm just so grateful that that's where we went, and that's kind of a yummy territory for me. And I feel like we really covered a lot of territory, so it's kind of hard to pick out one thing or another. But I think what we did was we identified the importance of stepping back and how we do need to think of it and approach it as a practice so that we're not too hard on ourselves, and that's really critical. But each of us finds our own personal way of stepping back and being able to cope with all of the challenges that we're faced with. And we are faced with a lot, and it just seems like the more we move into the future, the more demands that we have, and the harder we have to work, and the more things we have to juggle. So these are skills and tools that will really benefit all of us if we take the time to step back and learn how to step back. So, oh, and you can find me on the Fat Eyes web development blog. It's fateyes.com/blog, and of course on Google Plus, which is really my home away from home. I think I live there more than I live here, so because I love it so much.
Well, thank you. And I just want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you to Gina and to Alex and Dennis for being here today. Thank you to everyone who watched. I think my big takeaway, and it's something I say a lot, so it's not a surprise if you've seen me before, but my big takeaway is when you step back, try to remember why you started your business. And try to ask yourself, okay, is what's happening right now and me getting all upset or getting frustrated or feeling whatever I'm feeling actually helping me get closer to that goal? And if the answer is no, then maybe that's a sign for you to let it sit and just not to spend a lot of energy on it until you can find out why it's important or how it's going to help you make some progress. Because I think a lot of times we do get hung up, as I know, again, speaking for myself, we get hung up on stuff that's so small, and we spend tons of energy and time on it when we could have taken that energy and focused it on creating something that could be beautiful for ourselves or for our clients. So, you know, I would just encourage you to try to keep in mind why you started your business when you get in those tight moments, and take that step back to see if it's really worth the time and energy of getting upset about. So I hope everybody has a great weekend, and we will see you guys next week, I think. Dennis, have you got anything else for us? We can't hear you, Dennis.
I know. I was like, is it just me?
No, it's not just you. And Dennis, and for his final trick, Dennis does technical difficulties. Because we hadn't had any this week. I know you
there we go.
Everybody.
No,
Everybody freaked out.
still not there.
Yes, we can hear you now.
You can?
Mm-hmm.
I can hear you.
Okay. All right, I'm back. Though I probably don't sound as good because the batteries on my lavalier mic just died, so I can take this off. Anyway, yeah, on Monday we have our trailer show, which is now its own little 5 to 10 minute show where we ask the 4 questions. And we have for next week's show, oh, strange, I'm drawing a blank on names. That's really weird. I never do that. Robin, and you know what? Look for the notes, because I am drawing a total blank on names right this second. And that's weird, because I talked to them both this morning at length. So I'll be plugging in the events into this event for both Monday's 1242 Mountain 10-minute HOA, and of course we'll be back next Friday with another episode of Network Roundtable. What's our word next week, Stephanie? I don't even remember that.
Next week is acceptance, isn't it?
So just accept me for not remembering things. I'm done.
Okay, have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye-bye.